Hello and welcome to the AC with Wacy podcast. This is the first episode of our podcast. We've done some videos and stuff in the past, um, but uh, but trying out the podcast thing. Uh, so basically, this podcast is just going to be me. I'm Wacy with Brazos River Air Conditioning, and I'll be talking about a variety of HVAC related subjects and kind of letting y'all know what's happening in the AC world, share some funny stories occasionally, stuff like that. One of the things that we've had a lot of questions on lately, and we had done a video early last spring about it coming, is the refrigerant change. So I'm just kind of doing an update on that and tell you kind of what we know and and when everything's taking place. There's a lot of mixed stuff out there on this right now. There's a lot of people that are kind of bypassing it as, well, we've been through this before. We had the 22 to 410 change, um, 15, 20 years ago, and everyone was making a big deal out of that, and it didn't turn out to be as big of a change as we thought it was going to be, and all of that. I would say that's a valid point. This one's going to be slightly different in that with the 22 to 410 change, they started putting 22 units out in 2003, or started putting out 410 units in 2003. It was 2008 before it was mandated, and it was 2013 before they cut off the production of 22 units, which means there was a 5-year trial period to where contractors could get used to installing the new equipment, kind of get a get kind of a feel of how everything was going to go, and then make the change and slowly phase into it, and then still for 5 years after the mandated change, the equipment was being produced so contractors could kind of pick and choose which they were going to do for the betterment of their customers, and replace just an outdoor unit or just an indoor unit, and change expansion valves if the pressures allowed it, and all of that stuff. Uh, this one, um, this one is not going to be that way. This one is starting January 1st. They will be required to use eco-friendly refrigerants with global warming potential of 750 or less. Uh, that basically means no more 410 at all. 410A has a GWP of 2088, so it's no longer allowed in any new equipment being produced, which means rather than a 10-year period before the equipment is done being produced, we have a date where everything changes. We've known about this refrigerant change for about the last year. Uh, it was originally proposed years ago. Trump shut it down when he was in office, and then when he left office, it began the process of being pushed back through. And at this point, it's a done deal. It doesn't matter what the election does this year. Manufacturers have changed over their manufacturing. They've changed over their training. It doesn't matter who gets elected in November. This is a thing the first of the year. Because that's another thing that we hear a lot is, well, if Trump gets elected or this person gets elected, then they'll repeal that and we'll be back to it. And that's just not the case. They wouldn't even take office before the change happened. And manufacturers are too far invested to change it. So January 1st, it is happening. So rather than 10 years like the other Freon change, uh, we basically are an overnight change. I have still not personally seen any of this equipment. There's some of the manufacturers that said that they would start putting some out this summer. Some of that got delayed. Some of it has been produced but isn't really available everywhere. I've not personally seen any of it. Um, the training for it essentially goes over flammability concerns and how to avoid different things happening. Does not address any of the actual equipment other than telling us that there will be sensors to shut down the equipment in the event of a leak, and that we need to be changing over to brushless vacuums, brushless reclaim machines, etc. That way there's no spark in the tool when it's doing its job. Uh, they basically let us know in the training that we're no longer allowed to sweat out. So if you have a compressor, or a valve, or a coil, or something that is welded in there, usually when you replace it, what you do is you heat up the solder, you pull the line out, you put the new one in, you put the line back in, you solder it back in. With this stuff, because of the residue that the oil and everything would leave in the lines, even after you pull the Freon, they want you to cut that out and then clean your lines thoroughly, and then put the line back in with a new weld or press. I have a feeling they're going to really push us on moving to press tools. That isn't an official thing. Nobody's told me that. They just, a lot of the practices that they're pushing seem to push moving to press tools. So it's going to change the way that we work on equipment because we're going to have to change out a lot of our tools. We're going to have to change our practices on changing out parts. And then we're going to have to figure out these new sensors, and hopefully they roll out without a whole lot of problem. But they are sensors that haven't been used before, so I worry that they'll come out and have a high fail rate until they get worked out. Again, that's not anything that's being put out by anyone. That's just a me thought. Along with that, it'll gradually eliminate 410A from existing systems. There's a 1-year sell-through period for field assembled systems, meaning if there is inventory available, we will still be able to get 410A equipment for the first year. December 31st, 2025, it is essentially illegal for us to be purchasing 410A equipment. So I guess that's something that's kind of a harder line than they took on the 22 to 410 change, as well as condensing it into a 1-year rather than a 10-year process. As far as the refrigerant availability, R22 and R410A will become harder to find. It'll become more expensive to top off current systems. The 410A has a 20-year phase-out period that they're going to basically cut off availability of that refrigerant over the next 15 to 20 years. It'll become like 22 to where it gets expensive. In the short term, I don't envision a huge spike. We've actually seen 410A prices back off and become cheaper this summer, which is a nice change because everything in our world seems to get more expensive all the time. It's kind of nice to see something kind of back off. The new refrigerants, there's two that are really going to be used. There's R32A and there's R454B. R32A was developed by Daikin. In my opinion, is the better of the two refrigerants. It increases some efficiency, it increases some capacity. It is still slightly flammable, like the R454. But if I were the one making the calls, it seems to be a better refrigerant because at least we're gaining a slight bump. And when I say slight, I mean slight bump in capacity, and then we're also gaining a touch on kind of our cap on efficiency. Obviously, 14 SEER2 units will still be 14 SEER2 units. What 32 will enable them to do is get to a higher point on the high end of the efficiency chart. However, the only ones using it are Daikin and the companies that they own, basically Goodman and Amana and ones like that. The biggest reason for that is there was a lot of pushback from a couple manufacturers on the R32, and they wanted to use 454. And a couple of the major manufacturers decided to go with 454. And it looked like for a while that this was going to be a really wild process where, you know, a handful of brands would be 454, a handful of them would be 32. And pretty much everyone caved and went with 454. Like I said, the only major manufacturer I'm aware of doing the R32 is going to be the Daikin brands, the Goodman, the Amana. Whether that sets them apart and gives them a niche in the market to improve, or it kind of chokes out their market is kind of up in the air, and I guess we'll have to see how that goes. I've heard rumors that a lot of the ductless products, even by manufacturers that are putting out 454 in their ducted products, I've heard that a lot of the ductless will use R32. I don't know for sure how truthful that is. So basically, we've got all of that coming. And one of the big questions is, what is the new refrigerant? I've heard some misnomers that it's propane. It's not propane. It's not that flammable. It's definitely more flammable than our current refrigerants. However, it's not like we're feeding propane through your system and through your house. So what the A2L is A2L is a refrigerant that it can be a single or a blend of refrigerants in specific amounts. They have a lower flammability rating compared to A3 refrigerants that are hydrocarbons, propane, etc. However, they are a step up from the refrigerants that we use in the A1. So basically, we're just moving one step up the chart, and we'll still be below propane and all of that stuff. They have a lower toxicity than B series refrigerants, such as ammonia. So basically, they're considered the second safest class of refrigerants. The first would be the ones that we're currently on, but because of global warming numbers and the push for all of our clean environment initiatives, the move to A2Ls was kind of inevitable. Over the last 15, 20 years, the EPA and a lot of those agencies have gained a lot more power. So it was kind of inevitable that we would have to move to something. They knew when they put 410A out that the global warming number was worse than 22. However, the ozone depletion rate from 22 to 410 was better. So that fixed that problem, I guess, or addressed that concern, I guess. And then, but they knew when they put 410 out that it was not a long-term solution. But that's all politics. We don't have control over any of that. One thing that we get as HVAC contractors a lot is we almost get attacked over this stuff as if we're the ones doing it because we're greedy and trying to make more money. I do believe it's a money-based thing. It's a political thing, but it's not on the local level. So keep that in mind. Remember that us HVAC contractors are going to have just as hard of a time adjusting to this as you do. we do share your concerns with a lot of this stuff. We just don't have control over it. One of the big concerns with it is the flammability. So you'll hear everything from, oh, it's no big deal, they're not flammable at all, to other contractors that are saying we're going to be blowing up houses. Uh, it's not that flammable. It's the truth is somewhere in between there. Uh, they're extremely hard to ignite. The amount of A2L refrigerants needed to ignite is much larger than you would think. Basically, the air within a certain space would have to hold 10 to 15% of the stuff, depending on which refrigerant, and then you would need a large amount of energy to light it up. So the chances of you building up that much in your home is extremely low. These systems don't hold enough to get that high of a percentage. However, uh, if your unit is not running and you have a leak in your coil, to replace 10% of the air in the unit is something that could happen. So to bypass that, what they're doing is they're putting a sensor on the coil, and when it detects that it's leaking, it will shut your AC down. It will run the fan nonstop to disperse it into your house and get it, lower than the 10%. That way it's safer. They have what's called a lazy flame. As soon as the heat source is removed, the flame will extinguish itself. But so on the safety side of things, they're kind of addressing that with their sensor. I see a couple problems with the sensor that we'll inevitably have to deal with. One, new sensors typically struggle out of the box. It generally takes some field testing for sensors to be really effective. I worry that we'll have to deal with some sensors that aren't working very well, and that'll be an issue with new equipment. I don't know for a fact that they will. It's just one of those things that seems like it could be a problem. The other issue that I have with it is if you develop a small leak in your coil today, if it's 100, I'm in Texas. We hit 105 pretty regular these days. This summer it was almost an everyday thing for a while. If it's 105 outside and you develop a small leak with this stuff, it will shut off your AC. And to further that issue, if we get there, we diagnose that there's a leak, we cannot top off your system like we did with 410A or 22, because that sensor will still be active and that sensor will still be shutting down your 22 or your AC. So that's going to be an issue to where when you're down, you're down. There's not going to be a lot we can do. It's going to be sort of out of our control because again, we're not allowed to weld on these parts. So even if we were to be able to find it inside the line, we're not supposed to be welding on these parts. We're supposed to be sucking everything down, cutting the part out, and then clearing the lines and cleaning the lines, and then we can weld a new part in. So that kind of creates a catch-22 to where, yeah, the sensor's there for your safety, but if it's 105 degrees outside and you shut off somebody's AC and they have a health problem, that can cause an issue pretty quick as well. So hopefully they've got a workaround coming for some of that stuff. I don't know what it would be, because on my end as a contractor, if I go out there and I bypass that sensor, I'm taking a lot of liability into my hands, and liability that I not only don't want from a insurance perspective, but liability that I don't want on my mind from a person-to-person type thing. If I bypass that sensor and worst case scenario happens and it starts a fire in your house, I'm now responsible for you losing your stuff, possibly responsible for someone getting hurt. Um, so that's not something that I envision contractors taking a chance on. I don't see them bypassing a sensor to get somebody by a couple days while they get a new coil in, and and that could prove to be a large problem. Uh, One thing that is going to be nice uh, when you do have leaks and stuff, it's classified as a zoetrope. I think I'm saying that right. Uh, it it has a glide of 1.4. So basically, if it's low, you can top it off without having to recover the entire refrigerant charge and recharging it. Um, that was something with 410. I guess a lot of contractors didn't follow it real well. But if you lost 25 to 30% of your 410, you were supposed to be pulling everything out and recharging it, because you would lose enough of your, it's a mixture, and you would lose enough of your mixture to offset that mixture, and it wouldn't be as effective. But again, a lot of people didn't really follow that. But at least this one, it is, we can just reuse what is left in your lines if you have a small leak. Uh, so that's an upside, I guess. Uh, Basically, with the tools, uh, they're really trying to glide over that. There's, you know, they said many tools, I'm going to read right off their thing. Many tools used daily will not need to change. Some of your current tools may even already be A2L approved. Check with your local tool manufacturer. Well, this is true with some stuff. Your manifolds, your gauges, all of that stuff. If you have digital stuff, all of that stuff will work with it. If you have a PT chart, it doesn't matter what mechanical gauge you're using, you can take the pressure and find your temperatures. So while that stuff will work, a lot of the expensive stuff, the reclaim machines, the vacuum pumps, all of that stuff, most most AC contractors that I know have always, I mean, most every AC truck has a really old vacuum pump on it. Obviously, we're becoming a younger trade. Uh, a, a lot of the people doing it today are on the younger side of things, and they're buying new tools, and a lot of the new tools will work with this stuff. But personally, as a company, I didn't have a brushless vacuum pump in the company. So over this summer, I've made a point to replace vacuum pumps with brushless stuff, replace reclaim machines with brushless stuff. It's not a it's not a cheap transition. It works the same. You don't have to retrain how to use the tools, but it is a cost that's being laid onto us that will find its way back to you. Um, and and it's going to, I mean, as a HVAC professional, if you're good at your job, you know what you're doing. Changing the equipment's not going to change your ability to do your job. Uh, you're going to know how refrigerants work. You're going to be able to adjust to that. You can use brushless tools. You can use the old style tools. It's not going to make a huge difference on an AC contractor that's good at their job. Where the difference is going to be is in the cost. We're adding on the cost of the tools. I've I've no verification on this. This is really just a me thought. I tend to overthink things, but I would assume that our insurance is going to go up because regardless of how much they try to push that it's not that flammable, and obviously I read you the stats, it's not propane. There still is that risk to it, and they're putting sensors on these units for a reason. Um, it's not because they don't think it'll ever happen. They think there's a chance of it happening and them needing to adjust their equipment for that liability. And What that means is that there's a chance that something could happen to add to our liability. Um, I don't think insurance companies look at that and say, no big deal. I think insurance companies will look at that and say, we need to bump our rates because something's eventually going to happen. And so we'll add the tools on, we'll add the insurance on. On top of that, the pressure testing, which I don't think is a bad, this part of it, I don't think is a bad thing for the trade. Um, the pressure testing is going to be required to a higher level. The vacuum is going to be required to a higher level to where you clean the lines better. I don't think that's bad. I think there's a lot of bad practice in our trade today. I know a lot of companies are doing their best and trying to get everyone traded, but we are moving to be a young trade. A lot of the guys coming in are very, very young. A lot of the older guys are retiring, and it's hard to uh, it's hard to push some of the older practices onto the younger generation in such a short time period. I think the average age of an HVAC contractor in Texas is something like 58 right now, but just a few years ago it was 62 or 63. So that means that in that time we lost enough of the older generation to bring that number way down. And it's great to see the younger generation stepping in and adjusting to it and learning things. But we're losing a whole lot of knowledge on that end. So I do think that some of our practices could use some boosting, and this will push that a little bit because the liability is higher. You're playing with higher stakes. I think contractors will make sure that pressure testing and vacuums and all of these things are being done more. On top of that, a couple of manufacturers have referenced that they want you to document your pressure test and your vacuums. They're not going to require it to register equipment or anything. The way that I see that is if the worst should happen and a fire starts, if you don't have your documentation, then it's going to play back on you. And again, I don't think it's a terrible thing asking good practices out of HVAC contractors. I think it'll improve our industry in the long run. But the one thing that it will do is documenting that stuff and keeping documentation will take a little bit of time. Holding the pressure levels at a higher standard, I believe the number I keep hearing is 600 pounds versus like on weld systems now, we typically do a couple 100 pounds and we give it, X amount of time and then call it good. What they're talking about is 600 pounds for an hour is kind of the general. I've taken a couple of different manufacturers' stuff, and it's falling in that range. So we're using more nitrogen to pressure test our lines for a longer amount of time. So that's going to add to costs. We're pulling a vacuum to a lower level, which again is a good thing. We're cleaning the lines more and making sure that you have contractors documenting it, make sure that it gets done. And on the practice end, I think that's a good thing. But on the cost end, vacuums are one of the most time-consuming things on a change-out install. So what we currently have is a 6 to 8 hour install time because I've seen people do it in less. Don't get me wrong, I've done it in less. But if you're really taking care with what you're doing, pressure testing properly, cleaning your lines properly, vacuuming properly, we're at a 6 to 8 hour change out. And there's even arguments out there that getting done that quickly is not allowing enough time for cleaning the lines and vacuums and all of these things. Kind of an argument for another day. but bottom line, it's going to add to the time of that install. So being in Texas and the heat that we deal with and attics and all of that, I currently have 2 to 3 guys on a job to get done in that time period and make sure that everything's getting done and all of this stuff is being followed. If you're going to increase the amount of time that this stuff takes, I've either got to require my guys to be in that attic at a later point in the day, which is straight up dangerous, or I have to add someone to the job to increase the efficiency of the crew. So again, one more person on the job, a little extra time adds to the cost. Um, and then on top of that, when they get done, then I'm going to have to keep documentation of this stuff, which there's apps out there and everything that we're going to be able to do it. It's not that it's impossible, but we're probably going to have to pay for an extra app to store this information. And the easiest way to do it is going to be to have your tools as Bluetooth tools. And we currently have that. A couple of the setups on our trucks currently are Bluetooth. It was not a cheap change, and really the reason that I started to do it was because I saw this coming when I first took the classes last spring. So again, it's adding another cost on. All of these costs are going to roll up on the contractor, but you're going to feel them out there on the consumer end. I would estimate that the cost on my end, and I've done a lot of thought on this and put a lot of numbers to it, I would bet that my overhead is going to run something like 30% higher on a install change out type situation. So that cost, we're already at a very expensive time in the AC world, but that cost is going to add to it. On top of that, I've never seen equipment go down. Equipment always goes up. And since COVID, we've been hit with a lot of price increases. The price to do something today versus pre-COVID is a startling number to look at. I would expect this equipment to be higher. If it was a normal price change, you're usually in the 3 to 5%. I expect it to be higher than that. We're putting new sensors on. It's mandated change, so you don't have a choice. I would bet the number out of the box is probably 10. I don't know that. No manufacturers have given us any of that information. Again, we're 3 months away now. It's what, September? So yeah, right at 3 to 4 months away, and we don't have a lot of this info. We have classes telling us how to be safer with it, but a lot of this info is not to your local contractors yet, which is another reason that I think it's concerning that they're doing it almost overnight and compressing everything into a 1-year cycle once the change is made. Again, 22 to 410 was a 10-year change, and it was still a difficult change on consumers. This one's going to be even worse, I feel like. I don't know how much the equipment will go up. Maybe it'll go down. I have no way of knowing that. I've talked with a lot of HVAC contractors, and a lot of them feel the same way, and they feel 3 to 30% is kind of the range. And that's a scary range to have. That's a very broad range. I wish we had more info on it. I wish we could prepare more people for it, but I don't know that we'll have that. So with the overhead going up 30%, the price of equipment going up, let's call it 10%, that means that on your end, on the consumer end, you'll likely see a 20% increase on the cost of getting ACs installed. That's a pretty big jump when we just went through the post-COVID years where our equipment almost doubled since pre-COVID. I mean, the cost of an install, I was talking to a homeowner the other day, and he's like, well, I replaced one back in 2018. We was talking a 5-ton unit. And he said it was around $8,000. And I was like, I, I understand that, but today that install is 12, I think the number was 12.5 or something like that. And, uh, and he was pretty upset. He thought that I should be able to go back to the 8,000. And I couldn't even, like, uh, I would be losing a significant amount of money to go back to that pre-COVID price. I feel like a year from now, if we are doing jobs at the current price, we'll be seeing the same thing. We'll essentially be losing money to do jobs at the price that we're able to do them at today. So, with all of that in mind, I have I have kind of in my life, I guess I grew up uh, on the poorer end of the spectrum. Let's say we used stuff until it was done, uh, not because we wanted something new, not because it sounded fancier or more efficient or whatever. We used stuff till it was done, and so I've always, if we could get a customer buy, we get a customer buy on their 15, 20-year-old system, and give them the choice of replacing it now, or a year from now, take a chance on taking a hit on a price increase. I don't believe that that's good advice anymore. Um, this is this is the first thing I've ever come across to where I feel like waiting for next year is is not a is not a gamble. I think waiting for next year is the choice to pay more for your AC. I don't mean that as a sales tactic. You have an 8 year old, 9 year old, 10-year old system, run out and buy a new one. But if I was sitting on a 15, 20-year old system right now, I would much rather have the 410 products in my house than what I've heard of the A2Ls. Again, I've not seen this equipment. Maybe it'll come out and it'll be the greatest thing I've ever seen, and I'll change my mind on that. Um, but I always think about stuff for how can we work on it. And I don't like the idea of the coil sensors being able to shut off the AC. I don't like the idea of not being able to weld a leak shut. I don't like the idea of having to clean the lines every time you do a repair. Um, the the electronic system is going to get more complicated because we're adding these sensors in, and I don't like adding electronics into systems unnecessarily. It's one of the reasons I love the Samsung Hilux unit. Is the Hilux unit enables you to take a simpler air handler and get higher efficiency. So in that air handler, a Hilux versus a communicating system, in that air handler you have a mechanical valve, which is very easy to get. You can get it at your local supply house. You have an X13 motor, which you can get at almost any local supply house. You have relays and all of this stuff. All that stuff you can get. The outdoor unit obviously still has boards and has parts that'll be harder to get, but to get the high efficiency, that was a really good way to do it because you can now simplify your indoor unit and allow for parts that are easy to get versus a communicating system where you have a very specific thermostat. You have a very specific board in both the indoor and outdoor. You have an EEV, which is an electronic that is harder to get your hands on. You have a specialty thermostat. You have all of this stuff that's hard to get, and I've always disliked that about high efficiency stuff, but it was something that you had to deal with to get the efficiency up until the Hilux came out, and the Hilux allows me to get near that top end of efficiency while using a simpler unit, and I love that about it because in the end, if I go to someone's house and there's a problem and I can't fix the problem that day, it could possibly leave them without AC for an extended period of time in some extreme temperatures. Um, I see this doing the same thing as communicating systems. We're going to add electronics onto it that can shut down your system that I can't repair the day of. Get out there and you have a small leak, you're just down. There's going to be nothing I can do about it, and I don't like that. Especially since that essentially means that you're buying a coil. You're waiting for the manufacturer to get you a coil. If that was an overnight process, I wouldn't be as concerned. Uh, but again, since COVID, we've seen shipping times delayed and delayed, and it's been harder to get equipment. It's been harder to get parts. I don't have a lot of faith that that gets better, so I don't like the idea of waiting on a coil while my system shut down with nothing that I can do about it. Uh, and I think that's a very valid reason for somebody with a 15, 20-year-old system to say, hey, I'm going to buy a 410 system before it's off the market rather than wait for an A2L system. And again, a lot of this is speculation because I've never seen the equipment. I've not been to a training class with a physical piece of equipment that I can see how they work and all of this stuff. It's just not available, and we're 4 months away. So I think a lot of the, doomsday stuff of it'll blow up your house, it'll start fires, all of that stuff, I think that stuff's a little overboard. I think that manufacturers are smart enough to put safeties in place to keep it from doing stuff like that. I do believe, though, that it changes on my end how I can service customers. It'll change our installs. There's talk, kind of just popped into my mind, and I think it's worth exploring. There's talk of it being required to be encased in metal when going down a wall on the interior of the house. Valid, I think, because we see screws get run into Freon lines a couple of times a year. And so I think that's a valid concern because if you get a leak into a wall cavity, it's obviously easy to replace 10% of the air in that wall cavity, especially if you hit a hole the size of a screw or a nail that comes out pretty quick, and you're giving yourself somewhere for it to become flammable. So the encasing in metal is something that I think holds some water. However, if I am changing the system in your house, that means I can no longer use that Freon line that's in your existing wall. We would essentially have to rip your sheetrock out, encase it in metal, put the sheetrock back up, or run a new refrigerant line. So that again is something that may be required. That's understandable that it's required, but it's going to add to the cost of stuff. The size of the refrigerant lines. Again, this is all gleaned from some classes from different manufacturers, but I've heard that the 3/8 that we typically run our liquid line in is not going to be ideal for the new refrigerant. Ideally, I've been hearing that they would like us to change that size. However, we will be able to reuse it for the time being, and they've emphasized for the time being a lot. So I think that the possibility of having to run new refrigerant lines rather than cleaning them on every job is a real possibility. Again, adds to the cost, adds to the labor. Again, it's something that we can do. It's, as a contractor, it's not going to terribly. We run new refrigerant lights for various reasons all the time, but what it does is it adds labor and cost onto the consumer. So I think that's something that is coming to make us even more expensive. Hopefully, our manufacturers realize all this and they give us a bit of a break on pricing, and they find ways to make this easier on the consumer. But I worry that it's just going to be one of those things where we're told to deal with it because it's the law, and I guess we'll see. We'll see where that goes. California contractors are going to see even more as California typically does, uh, they're shutting off, they're going beyond what the EPA is doing, which is, like I said, very California like. But they're going to shut down the sale of refrigerants uh, in a shorter time period. So for 410A, 404, 507, ones that are used in walk-in coolers, ones that are used in ACs, etc., you will no longer be able to buy them in California, from what I've read, past January 1st, 2025. Um, that means that any refrigerant leak that is in California between uh, January on, you will essentially be stuck with changing systems because they won't be able to recharge you anyway. We'll see if they hold to that. I have a feeling that that won't hold very long. It'll cause a lot of problems if they do. But the AC, the ACHR newsletter that I subscribe to, they're encouraging people to buy in bulk and store a bunch of virgin refrigerant, because if that passes in California and they hold to it, it's going to create another thing to where it'll be really hard to fix current equipment. So we'll see where that goes. Um, the other things, are all easily done. Education, it'll be there'll be education available. They've already got a lot of classes on the practices that we should be following to eliminate the liability and the risk that goes with these refrigerants. I assume that those classes will become better and more prevalent. I think anyone that's a contractor that cares about his customers is hitting training anyway. So I don't see that as a major change. They're going to allow the EPA cards that you currently hold as contractors and technicians to apply to these refrigerants. Uh, there is talk of you having to train and certify under A2L. I don't know if that'll be something that'll be tracked. It'll be another card that we have to carry. But there's talk of that coming to have on file that you've completed the A2L training. The coordination is going to be, they're trying to prepare for it as much as they can. I have a feeling it's going to be wild. A local supplier, some of the equipment that they carry, was supposed to start phasing in the A2L stuff at the beginning of August. And they were scrambling because the A2L stuff did not arrive on time. But worse than that, they couldn't get any of the older products either because they were trying to make that change, and there was a real shortage of equipment with those brands. And I have a feeling that come the first of the year, we're going to see that. I would really like to think that supplies in warehouses and inventory will hold out on 410 equipment longer next year. Like there'll be typically equipment will roll through in 3 or 4 months. When we're installing it, typically the manufacture date is 3 or 4 months previous. I would hope that they're stocking warehouses for 6 to 7 months to give us a little bit of time to adjust to this, but I don't know that that's the case, and I don't know that there's not going to be a huge run to stock equipment in warehouses. Back in 2008, I was actually working for a company in South Dakota, and I was running inventory. I had developed a computer database system to help track their inventory, and HVAC was one of the things that the company did. And we heard this same thing of you won't be able to buy equipment and all this, and we stocked more R22 equipment. I think we I think I can't remember, 5 times as much as we normally would. And again, that stuff was still available till 2013, so I'm sure they regretted that. Uh, again, uh, we could run into that where they panic and they allow the 410 stuff, but I feel like manufacturers have already made the change. I don't think that we'll have it available, even if they decide to change the dates on the legislative end. I don't feel like it's going to be available. I would bet that we're in September now, I would bet by September of next year, 410 equipment is very hard to get. Um, I don't know for a fact that's going to be the case. That's the gut feeling that I get. Uh, as as you study the market and you're in the industry a while, it's uh, it's kind of, you get feelings on it. And the other thing that I keep in mind, that I keep reminding people of as they say, we went through this with 410. The EPA did not have the power in 2003 or 2008 that it has today. Um, to think that they can't move quicker today than back then is foolish. I believe that this change is going to come, and I believe it's going to come really fast. And I think there's going to be next spring a major shortage as they're trying to push out the new equipment and people are trying to get used to it and the old equipment being gone. And I think there's going to be a panic and a buy up of all the 410 equipment. And I would bet by the end of the summer you can't get your hands on 410 equipment. Hopefully I'm wrong. Um, I personally hope that we have availability of the 410 equipment long enough for us to make a change and get comfortable with that change. Um, I wish we were already installing some of these systems. I wish it was sitting in my warehouse and we could see how it works here and there. Um, it's just not the case. So I think the coordination next spring is going to be an issue. We'll see how it works out. Maybe over the next 4 months, there's better communication. Uh, we get trained up better. We see more of this equipment. It's less of a jump skill wise and practice wise than it looks like it's going to be. And it's just a smooth transition. The pessimistic side of me wants to say that that's foolish to assume that that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a major cluster for a while. Uh, One of the best things that I think we can do as contractors is transparency with your customers. Uh, if you don't know, you don't know. People ask me pretty frequently what this equipment is going to be like, how dangerous it's going to be, how these sensors are going to work. And I'm having to tell them I just don't know. I can tell them what we went over in the classes. I can tell them everything that I know, and I do a bit of reading. I can tell them everything that I know, but I can't tell them what I don't know. And I think more than anything, our obligation as contractors to be transparent with our customers and to just be willing to say, I don't know, or to push the tide. I know a lot of manufacturers aren't going to be happy hearing contractors put out stuff like this to where we have real doubts about it. I've actually been warned by suppliers that manufacturers can blackball companies for putting stuff like this out. I don't think that that'll happen, but I'm sure they won't like that, and they'll want us as contractors to sugarcoat this as much as we can. But I think as contractors, we really need to be transparent on this change. We need to be doing our due diligence. We need to be reading. We need to be going to the classes. We need to be in our suppliers' ears, hitting up the manufacturers with concerns. We need to know all that we can know. However, I think that on the customer level, it's going to be really important for us to be really transparent with what we know and what we don't know and how it's affecting everything, because I'm really worried that we're 4 months away, and I've not seen this equipment. They don't have an install training class. They don't have a service training class. When I've asked manufacturers and suppliers to give me an upside to this equipment, aside from the global warming number, I've not had anyone come up with one. Some of the Daikin guys, they'll push the R32 being able to be more efficient. I have heard that, and that is something that's encouraging. But on the 454, which is going to be the main change, the majority of manufacturers, I've yet to hear anyone that has anything that they like better about the 454 than the 410. And I think that's a I think that's a concern that's worth having. If you're 4 months away from a mandated change and you can't get the people making the equipment to come up with a reason that they like the change, I think I think what we're going to find is it was a major misstep by the government. I think that we're going to find that this is a very costly process, and the cost, unfortunately, is going to be passed back to the consumer. The contractors are going to take a lot of heat over it. We already take a lot of heat over all the price changes the last few years. We have absolutely no control over that. Business got more expensive to do. Equipment has gotten a lot more expensive. Uh, Believe us, as contractors, it's been severely challenging since COVID to be on top of your operation and keep it profitable while keeping the service to the customers, because we see changes every day, and this change is going to be a major one. And as much as we would like to have all of the answers, I, for one, don't have all of the answers right now, and I've tried seeking them out. So I think I think that the transparency level is going to be really important to both contractors and consumers through this whole process as we hit January. Um, I guess in conclusion on the podcast, I hope that I've given you the information that I have on it, and that you'll be able to point yourself in a direction to where you can kind of see what you can find on it, and yeah, just I don't know, make up your own mind on it, I guess. I mean, I hate, as a professional, that I pride myself on being very good at looking up information, having information for my customers, knowing all of the details about what I'm doing, so that I can be of better service to my customers. This is a service industry first. We've lost sight of that somewhat. There's a lot of sales companies out there, but those of us that are still trying to push the service side of things, we really try to stay informed, and we try to stay on top of this stuff. And it's become very difficult recently. So I think I think the best thing that we can do is have a little bit of patience on the consumer end. Uh, Allow your contractors to do their research and find everything that they can find on it, and trust them that they're not this. This is not a way to just sell equipment and make more money. It's being pushed down. We don't have a lot of control over it. It is going to cost more. AC companies will probably make more money off of it, but it's not something that we've chosen to do. It's something that's coming down the pipe. And now that's Weston just walking in the middle of a podcast.
I'm going to sit out there in 105 degrees all day.
No, but anyway, so in conclusion, I hope I've given you some information. As we get more information, I'll put it out there. Thank you for stopping by, and look forward to doing this every week. Hopefully it won't be as uninteresting of a topic every week, but the refrigerant change is coming, and it's going to be something that I think is really important for people to know about. So I figured we would start off our first podcast with that and go from there. Until next time.